Hey guys, so as most of you probably know by now, I love Shakespeare, and since I recently finished reading Shakespeare's main 8 history plays, I've been doing a lot of learning about medieval English kings lately. So today, I'm going to give you a brief history of the glorious disaster that was the English royal family from Richard II to Henry VII. So you too can be prepared to get into the history plays someday. Admittedly, this stuff is complicated. I know I was really intimidated getting into it, but here's just a quick crash course to give you the basics. So first off, a word about how royal succession works. Basically, when a king dies, the crown doesn't automatically go to the oldest living descendant. Normally, it would go to his oldest son, but if his oldest son is dead, then it doesn't go to his second son. Instead, it goes to the oldest son of his oldest son. Basically, everyone in the oldest son's line has to be dead before the second son can ever get a chance at the crown. Assuming the king does have children, whoever is the first in line to succeed him, according to this order, is called the heir apparent. That means he's the heir no matter what, unless he ends up dying before the king. But if the king doesn't have children, then the heir to the throne is called the heir presumptive. That means he's the heir for now, but he can be displaced if a better heir is born. So the king's younger brother might be heir presumptive while the king is childless, but as soon as the king has a son, the son becomes heir apparent, and now the king's brother is pushed to second in line. So, with that in mind, let's take a look at part of the medieval English royal family tree. Simple, right? Don't worry, I'll help break it down. So, when we're talking about this part of history, we have several different family lines vying for kingship at varying points, and there's always a question about who has the best claim, best according to the system I described up there, to the throne. And it pretty much always comes back to this guy, Edward III. Edward III had 5 sons, at least 5 who lived long enough to be important. His first son, Edward the Black Prince, actually died before he did. So when Edward III died, it went to the Black Prince's son, who became Richard II. Richard was actually only 10 at a time, so the time between when he gained the crown and when he turned 18 was known as his minority, when his older advisors, mostly Edward III's other sons, basically ruled for him. We'll see this happen again in a few generations. There was a problem though, because Richard II had no children, so no heir apparent. Historically, the man he named as heir presumptive was Roger Mortimer, who was descended from Edward III's second son, Lionel, Duke of Clarence. Shakespeare kind of combines him with his younger brother Edmund because he took a lot of creative license. Anyway, we'll just call him Mortimer. But as it turned out, lack of children wasn't Richard II's only problem. He faced a lot of scandals over the course of his kingship, but at one point, he ended up banishing this man Henry Bolingbroke, son of Edward III's third son, John of Gaunt, over a quarrel with another duke. Then, when Henry was banished, John of Gaunt died, and instead of letting Henry inherit the dukedom of Lancaster as was his due, he tried to seize all of Gaunt's lands to fund a war he was fighting. This was a very unpopular choice, and when Henry Bolingbroke returned to claim his dukedom, nobles flocked to support him, and he became so powerful that he actually ended up deposing Richard II and becoming king himself, King Henry IV, first king of the House of Lancaster. Richard II later died in prison, probably executed or starved by Henry's men. So now, Henry IV was king. He faced a lot of struggles during his own reign, including rebellions by several nobles allied with Mortimer, attempting to put Mortimer on the throne instead. Remember, since Mortimer was descended from the second son of Edward III and Henry from the third son, he technically had a better claim. But Henry IV managed to hold on to the throne, and it passed peacefully to his oldest son, Henry V. Henry V was a very popular king. He had huge military success in France, where he managed to pursue a claim to that throne as well, got King Charles of France to make him his heir, and married Catherine, the Princess of France. Unfortunately, he died before he could assume the throne of France, and again, the crown passed peacefully to his oldest son, Henry. There was just one little problem. Henry VI was 9 months old. So, like Richard II, during Henry VI's minority, the country was controlled by a variety of advisors who managed to do a better job fighting amongst themselves than fighting the French, because pretty much all of France had been lost by the time Henry came of age. Henry didn't prove much of a king after turning 18 either. He was weak-willed, he hated conflict, and the country was basically governed by whoever could influence him best. Then, after hearing about a serious loss in France, Henry actually suffered a total mental breakdown and was unresponsive for over a year. During this time, the kingdom needed a protector to rule in Henry's place, and that protector was Richard, Duke of York. His mother was the daughter of Mortimer, and his father came from the line of Edmund, Duke of York, meaning he was descended from both Edward III's second and fourth sons. Medieval royals did love their incest. But that technically gave him a better claim to the throne than Henry, so when Henry recovered, York ended up making a bid for the crown. We now enter a period of history called the Wars of the Roses, so named because the white rose was a symbol of the House of York, and the red rose, at least retrospectively, was associated with Henry's House of Lancaster. York managed to get Henry to make him heir to the throne, But Henry already had a son, Edward, who he was thereby disinheriting, and Henry's wife Margaret of Anjou was, for obvious reasons, not thrilled about this. She led forces against York and eventually executed him and his second son, but shortly after, York's oldest son Edward, now Duke of York himself, gained the advantage with the help of the Earl of Warwick. So, Edward IV was crowned and ruled for about 10 years, but when his secret marriage to a fairly low-born woman named Elizabeth Woodville upset the Earl of Warwick, Warwick turned against him and, with the help of Margaret of Anjou, tried to get Henry VI back on the throne. He was crowned again, although for less than a year. Until he was captured, his son Edward was killed, and Henry himself died shortly after in captivity. So, now Edward IV was king again, with a much more stable reign. He had two sons, Edward and Richard, but Edward IV fell fatally ill when his oldest son was only 12. So, you know the drill. It's time for another king in minority. That always goes well. This time, the protector of the kingdom was Edward IV's brother Richard of Gloucester, but Edward V was never actually crowned, because Richard managed to take control of him and eventually got Edward and his brother declared bastards and locked in the Tower of London, where they were most likely killed. And now Richard III was king, although this didn't last very long either. It was only 2 years before he was overthrown by a rebellion led by Henry Tudor. Wait, who? Okay, so remember Henry IV's father, John of Gaunt? He had 2 more children with another woman, the Beauforts, who were initially considered illegitimate and later legitimized, but generally considered not contenders for the throne. Henry Tudor's mother was descended from that line, and his father was actually the son of Henry V's widow, Catherine. So basically his claim was pretty obscure, but hey, pretty much all the other viable heirs of Edward III had been killed off by then, so why not go for it? Henry Tudor defeated Richard III in battle, Richard was killed, and Henry was crowned as Henry VII. He married Edward IV's daughter Elizabeth, uniting the houses of Lancaster and York, and it is here that we come to the end of the Wars of the Roses and of Shakespeare's main history plays. Thanks for watching.